So, I'm sure I've talked about this before, but if I haven't, consider this the first time. If not, consider it a bit of a follow-up, an update, whatever you want to call it. But it seems that when it comes to comic books, no matter who the publisher is, or even the writers, it seems that when they're based on an established franchise, that they're allowed a little bit of leeway, if not a lot of leeway. Whether it comes to, how the characters are portrayed, the language that they use, the wording, if you will, or maybe even the violence. The maturity, the mature level, basically, of how the story and the comic and everything is presented, the presentation overall. It seems that when you read comics, they have a lot more leeway. Sometimes a little bit, and like I said, sometimes a lot. And when it comes to romance, that's no different. It really isn't. I mean, I just did an audio reply to what Splash Dash, I think that's who it is, Splash Dash said in their video, where they asked, should Sonic have a girlfriend? And they touched upon how in the Archie Sonic books, it's a lot more different, a lot more different dynamic when it comes to Sonic and Sally's relationship than it was in the cartoons. In the cartoon, it was more like, will they, won't they, in the first season and the early part of the second season. And eventually we did find out that they would. But the difference between the two is in the comic book, the comic was allowed to be more exploratory, if you will. Basically, they were able to go, directions and paths that, normally the cartoon wouldn't have gone had the cartoon, not been, just a couple of seasons. I mean, had the cartoon continued, maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But, yeah, the Archie comic went in directions that normally the cartoon wouldn't. It delved deep, way deep, into whether or not they would, even be an item, or whether or not someone else would steal the other away. And we saw that on both fronts, if you understand what I'm saying. And what I mean by both fronts, is love triangles. We would see the love triangle with Sally and Jeffrey and Sonic. But then on the other side, we would see it with Sally, Mina, and Sonic. Or even, to an extent, Sally, Amy, and Sonic, or Sally, Fiona, Sonic. And again, Sally and Jeffrey and Sonic on that side of the coin. And then later on, you add in the likes of, Ken Khan, formerly Monkey Khan, to the fold. And then if you want to look a little further or a little, earlier than that, you add Antoine to the fold. I mean, heck, you could look at the cartoon, and it was mostly, somewhat, very subtly, Sonic, Antoine, and Sally, and then occasionally you throw a character in there, as I mentioned in the other video, like a Grift, to kind of be that wild card, that obstacle, that would stand in the other's way. But the difference, though, like I said, is with the comics, they delve a lot deeper. They went so deep that, unfortunately, it caused Ian Flynn to say, you know what, enough of the romance. With the soft reboot, retcon, whatever you want to call it, he decided basically the only romance he's going to have is Bunny and Antoine. He might hint at something being, between Sally and Nicole. And if he wants to, he'll just maybe put something in there once or twice, maybe a few times to indicate something between Sonic and Sally, and that's it. That's it. That's all he did. Because he was sick and tired of the romance, just dragging it down and people just not choosing a side and sticking with it, or just basically not making a big argument deal about it and just being like, or just be satisfied with the fact that, okay, Sonic's got a girlfriend and Sally, we'll leave it at that. He just got sick and tired of it, just dragging things down. But the thing is, even he would admit that had he tried to do this with a cartoon, like let's say if he tried to do this with Sonic Boom, when he kind of wrote occasionally for it, he wouldn't have been allowed to dive as deep as the comic allowed him to. There's no way. And, and speaking of comics, that brings me to another one that I kind of like and I try to catch up on. And that's the IDW My Little Pony Friendship is Magic comic. And apparently, it seems more, I guess you could say, willing to go in a direction that some fans are very mixed about, and that's spike and rarity. Even though, as I've mentioned recently, over time things have changed to the point that basically there are fans that used to be against spike and rarity that are more accepting of it now. Even when the comic was running, they still were kind of like, I'm not really sure, about this. But then again, like I said, you have fans nowadays more accepting of it because I guess they look at Spike being his older self as a more reasonable answer to being with Rarity. But the comic, as far as I know, I didn't get to read all of the comic, over its 100-issue run, believe it or not. I didn't get to read all of the comic. I got to read a few here and there, including some of the spin-offs, like Friends Forever. But the thing is, the comics, from what I understand, delve just a bit deeper. They went and did things that the cartoon wouldn't. Like when they did the Nightmare Rarity arc, it was, as I pointed out before, it was Spike that was the final key to restoring Rarity. It was Spike that when he first tried to get through to Rarity, basically tried to say that he loved her. And again, that you fast forward to an issue or so later, and he's the main final key that gets her back to normal. And then you have that little moment in the panel where she's holding him close, and you see a little heart above the both of them. And then you get to the holiday annual of a couple of years ago, and it's mainly a Rarity story, a Spike and Rarity story, that is. And from what I understand, from what I could tell, the comic, even in between all this, in the 100 issues, had several moments and occasions, and maybe you could correct me on it, to where they would be more accepting of a Spike-Rarity relationship. Tease it, showcase it a little bit, flirt with it, more so than the show. And that's because they had more free range. They did. They had more free range than they would in the actual show itself. Yeah, it wouldn't be until the final seasons under the direction of Nicole Dubuque that we'd finally get a little bit more Spike and Rarity Sparity spotlight than we had previously. But still, the fact of the matter is the comic was more willing. It really was. The comic was more willing than I think anybody could imagine. It really was. In fact, if we go and look at Archie Comics again, Archie Comics, believe it or not, when they had the license to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Adventure series, they went the romance route with Raphael and the character Ninjara, aka Yumiko, if you will. I think that was her name, Yumiko, Umiko. But Ninjara, yeah. They went that distance, and they gained a long-standing relationship that had its ups and downs until we got to Moon Eyes. And I think originally the City at War story, had it been made a reality, would have probably fixed what happened in Moon Eyes. We're not really sure. And then you have the fact that Raphael met and married someone very similar in species to Ninjara called Mizcal, and it's like, again, they were able to dive deep, and I mean deep, into a relationship that normally the cartoon wouldn't. I mean, the cartoon, the original 87 to 96 cartoon did tease having Raphael with a love interest, and that was Mona Lisa. And yes, I will give the Nickelodeon series credit, the CGI one, that they were able to kind of capitalize on that with their interpretation of Mona Lisa. But, still, it's like, it wasn't as much as, let's say, the comic had done with Raphael and Ninjara before that. And even when IDW got the license to the book, they gave Raphael another love interest in Aeroplex. Now, I don't know the status of Aeroplex right now. I'm assuming she'll be back somehow between or after the Armageddon game, if you will. We'll have to see whether or not that happens. But, they gave him Aeroplex. Heck, they gave not Raphael, but Michelangelo a love interest, for a brief period. The thing is, comic books are more, when it comes to romance, have more leeway and more free range to do what they want when it comes to romance. Not entirely, depending on who the licensee, or the licensor, I should say, is, but they have a little bit more leeway, a little bit more free will. And that's what's amazing and to me about reading a comic book interpretation of an established franchise and its characters. Knowing that if romance is involved, you don't have to worry about it being a quick one-off or two-off or whatever. If you're into it, you can keep paying attention to it for as long as you want. And that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing, in my opinion. But, be that as it may, even, Boom Studios, going back to them, I talked about how, like with the Power Rangers, I talked about this in one previous, I think I talked about it in the previous audio maybe, I'm not really sure. But the Power Rangers, it ties into what I said earlier about how comics, depending on the franchise, could be a lot more violent, a lot more mature, with the characters. Have them say, certain, words, when they, speak at times. Power Rangers is one of those examples. But when it comes to romance, well, Boom Studios cannot be left out. Because when Boom Studios, for a brief period, was working with Disney, and Ian Brill wrote the 8-part Rescue Ranger series, comeback series. One of the things that he did was put Dale and Foxglove together. He brought back Foxglove mainly to, basically back up the fact in a letters page in one of the final issues, whether it was issue 4 or 8, to basically back up the fact that the reason she was here, the reason they brought in her father, Inglewood, for a brief period, is to establish the fact, as they say in that letters page, her and Dale are on and off, if not on, as boyfriend and girlfriend. Basically, they have a romance going. And even though good times, bad times at the end kind of left it up to your imagination of whether or not they got together, the comic basically flat out said, an official Disney comic, courtesy of Boom Studios, flat out said, yes, they are an item. They are. And to me, the way they displayed, their affection for each other felt very real. Felt like a romance that was like, yeah, it's existing, but it's kind of like the romance that gets put on hold sometimes because of what Dale is about, who Dale, is essentially. But in a way, the comic, mostly during the second half of it, the second run, even somewhat in the first run, if you will, like the second half of the first 4 issues, and mostly, I should say, in the full second half, if you will, it was mostly a Dale and Foxglove story. Mostly a Dale story, but Foxglove included, which didn't have to be done. Yes, you had Gadget's story in there with Gidget, or Glitch, I should say. You had a story in there with Glitch. But if you take that and put it to the side, it was mostly a Dale story. And it began in the early issues of the first half of this 8-part limited series. And then as it grew, of course, we started to see that it wasn't just a Dale story, or even a Gadget story by association, but from a romance standpoint, it was a Dale and Foxglove story. And like I said, the way they were portrayed in the overall, 8-part series really felt genuine and real. And again, Ian Brill and his team did not have to go that far, but that's what comics allow you to do. Unlike with shows, where they give you a little bit of an idea, a taste of what could be, and leave it to your imagination, the comic went further. It really did. And again, when it comes to romances, comics can do things that the shows couldn't. For example, when Disney had their Disney Adventures mini magazine with the mini comics in there, one of them was a Bonkers story called Nose on the Run. And all Bonkers had to do when he tried to play cool and everything, is be himself and ask Fondier out with him to the policeman's ball, and she accepted. And what's crazy about that is not only does that build on that relationship outside of the cartoon, which gave us a taste here and there, mostly with the shorts, but somewhat in the main series, what that did is it basically built upon it by incorporating her into basically the side of Bonkers that we normally wouldn't see her in until basically the mid-season finale, the transitional episode, the flashback, the episode Tune with No Name, or I think that's what it was called, where she was in the flashback, and the beginning. But the comic, where he basically asks her out and she accepts, that's built upon, that's a romance that, they were building upon. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to incorporate Fawn to be his date. They could have had him say, you know what, I'm just going to go and enjoy the party with Fall Apart. That's it. Go stag. But they had him ask Fawn, and she accepted. The point being, comics, no matter whether or not they're part of a magazine, no matter whether or not they are, part of an official publication, the comics, especially if they're based on a franchise license, they are allowed to go as far in romance than I think anybody can give them credit for. And that has to be respected. It has to be. It has to be respected no matter what. But what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on some of the examples I gave here? Give me your thoughts in the comment section as well as in the live chat during the premiere. Like the video. Support me over at Venmo at Brian-Walmart-2 and Cash App at BWRoses98, guys. I could really use your help right now financially. Also, support me over at VENMO at BWRoses for content you can't get here on YouTube. Also, support me at DeviantArt.com, says BVW1979. Also, support me at BWRoses Discussions, all your favorite audio podcast locations except for Pandora, where you will get an audio podcast of this. And check out the Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else. All of these will be, the Teespring store mainly will be here at the end of the video in the upper left-hand corner. Click on that to see what merchandise you can, sink your teeth into for the upcoming spring and later winter months of this year, of the beginning of this year. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are overall. Comment below, like I said, live chat. And until then, I'm out.